And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're receiving this information. My name is Rafael Vasquez Guzman, and this is Chisme is Life, a podcast that addresses a lot of issues that people may have, things that matter to us as immigrants, refugees, or the children of immigrants and refugees. At some point, we're talking about trauma. We're talking about the no sabo kids. We're talking about so many topics that I believe are important for our community. And that's why I decided to create Chisme is Life. And with that said, today we are privileged to have my colleague and friend, Brijida Aleman, who is a psychotherapist at Santa Rosa Junior College. And that's your professional career, but you are all over the community. And so today's conversation is going to be about vicarious trauma. So Brígida, thank you for accepting the invitation to the show. You and I have known each other for many years, and I think that the work that you do working with immigrant and refugee communities, as well as the native indigenous communities of Northern California, is essential. So, again, I know you're busy, but thank you for taking the time and being here.
Yeah, thank you. Gracias.
And so, tell us a little bit about yourself, because I think that as we start the conversation about vicarious trauma and what it is and how it affects us, I think that a lot of it starts at home and whether or not we feel connected to our cultures and whether or not our cultures are healthy or toxic. In the second episode of our podcast, we talk about trauma and how sometimes our families have been carrying this trauma for generations and generations. And so, tell us a little bit about your ancestry as a starting point for this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Gracias. That's so important to me. So, yes, I come from native roots up at Hopland, Pomo, and Wailaki, and también Huasteca from San Luis Potosí. My indigenous native roots here in Northern California um, is definitely comes from um, there's lots of pain with that. Um, as a disenrolled tribal member, that trauma to our own family, being told that our blood doesn't belong, being told that our family doesn't belong, um, it hits the soul. And so I'm proud to say that I don't allow, colonization and enrollment to dictate who I am and who I be in the world, because that's where enrollment came from, and it stemmed from colonization.
Mhm.
So for me, I think that being shunned from a very young age, to, first of all, you don't speak Spanish. Second of all, we don't say that, if you need to identify, always make sure that you identify as Native American. But I never knew why. And
Mhm.
so as I grew older, my mom, also a former tribal chairwoman of our tribe, who served there for over 13 years, when she became involved with our tribe, I understood why we were not raised with our relatives, why we were not raised and shown the ways of life of the reservation. The poverty, the drug addiction, the violence. Um, it, I knew as an adult at that point that my parents, my mom primarily, protected myself and my siblings from that lifestyle. And so when I witnessed, having privilege to work on my reservation, when we had a business there, I witnessed the trauma of the males, the trauma of the people, of my own relatives, and how they had been treated, how they had been not allowed, access to food,
Mhm.
to water, to the land, to um, economic wealth. Even having a job on the reservation was a privilege, and not having access to education, and what that showed up for people, and what I witnessed as a person that worked with the people and my relatives is the severe devastation of lost spirits and people coping through drugs and alcohol and, you know, violence. And so I find myself in the work today. I always say that I've been planting seeds of hope all along as a very young child. You know, I can remember back when I was 2, 3 years old. I've been an adult since then because I've had to be. I had to protect my younger sister. I had to ensure that I was safe because I knew my mom was out working multiple jobs to provide what we had. And you know, you think of that and you say, oh my goodness, like how would you remember things that when you were 2? Well, that's the level and the depth of trauma in which I experienced. And so all along through my childhood, through my adulthood, through relationships, and through my employment, my career, and who I am as a spiritual being, um, I can't help but know that because of where I've come from, because of where I know my relatives come from, is why I do the work that I do, because my heart, my spirit really does care and love people, love our community, love our relatives. And so I find that having found my voice in this work is powerful, and empowering others to know that they deserve and they belong and they can access is everything that I want, and so much more than that. So yeah, it's definitely a journey of being raised as a little indigenous girl, not knowing where I was going until later on in my life, because I am an older person in this career. I'm in my 4th career, and all along I've always known that this is the work that I would be doing.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to direct trauma, right? Which again, we've spoken with a colleague in a previous interview, Bianca Viña, who's also a psychotherapist, but then vicarious trauma, right? Like when you speak about, well, you had to grow up even though you were a child, it really sometimes it means, at least for me, knowing where the car keys were at all times, knowing where maybe the wallet was or where something was. It was all about avoiding additional trauma, right? Not getting yelled at,
Absolutely.
not yelling at somebody, my parents, right? Not yelling at somebody, no physical violence, whatever. And watching all of this, even if the violence, emotional or physical, is not directed to you, it becomes part of you and
Ab-
how it affects you. So, perhaps what you could do is talk to us a little bit about vicarious trauma in how, again, it affects many of us with indigenous roots and the Latinx community.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that. This conversation, because in the work, I will say that, I am a newer therapist. I've been a therapist for, since 2021. And I, I'm a hard worker, naturally, as Latino people and indigenous folks, we work really hard. And this past summer was definitely a time of emotional and psychological and spiritual devastation that I witnessed and I worked through, helping students that are either undocumented or their family and their relatives are undocumented, and listening to the stories and listening to how, watching through the lens of the students that are watching their relatives feel the fear and pain and the journey of the unknown, and where the student who's younger that's watching their family not know what's next, witnessing the students' experiences, and myself as a therapist also listening to the context in which they're sharing, the level of devastation, fear. the nightmares, the detachment, their emotional numbness. I felt the same thing with them. And I worked so hard this past summer of 2025 to embrace myself in the work so that I can support those that are also having this vicarious trauma. So witnessing events, hearing of the events. And so in my work, I'm hearing it. The student is witnessing it. That is vicarious trauma, which the person is experiencing an emotional and psychological effect of just being with someone and listening, the perpetual news, the social media, constantly exposing ourselves to that every day because we want to be informed in how this affects our sleep and how we're constantly hyper vigilant. We're constantly on the phone, constantly like, what's next? Who's around? Oh my goodness, I see a car that looks like that must be ICE. And how this really changes our whole physical and psychological self and how we show up in the moment, whether that's in the classroom, with our family, at work. All of that impacts us, and we call that vicarious trauma. And having the privilege to work with people, to share with them what that means, and to identify what their body is experiencing is this unknown that they're being exposed to. That is my family leaving? Am I leaving? What do I do? Because I see my relatives, my family, my parents in distress. And then you're taxed with the responsibilities. And you don't even know why that all of that is being, placed on a burden on you, but to protect your family. As an indigenous person from the land here, from Northern California, witnessing, there's a lot going on in Indian country, and there's a lot that's acceptable and a lot that isn't, and you're either not Indian enough, or you're whatever you want to identify as and what you're being told that you are and you aren't. I think witnessing that if you aren't part of the culture, if you don't dance, if you don't beat, if you're not part of sweat, if you're not part of the fire, if you're not part of all these things that culture tells us that we're supposed to be doing, then you're not Indian. You're not Native American. And so witnessing people share those things and say those things, and I'm hearing this personally, and I'm also in private practice and working with Native American children, hearing those little kids talk about how their parents are having them do things to be part of the culture so that they also are not shunned. And these kids don't want to do certain parts of the culture. They're just trying to kind of be a kid in the Western world, because that's their life. Every day is Western way. You go to school, you're not wearing, your cultural regalia to school, and you just want to be. So I'm hearing the inner conflict of children that are Native American, that are being told by their parents how they're supposed to walk when they're resisting, yet they're exposed to domestic violence at home. Yep. The kids have access to everything on TV, social media, you name it. Whatever the parents are experiencing, the child is now affected. And how do we walk in a good way when you're living not in a good way? And so how does that really sound like it balances for a child? And so witnessing that for the kiddos is challenging. But I think, working with the kids, these kids are younger than 18 years old. A lot of them are between 8 and 12. Being able to just be there as a support to help them color and draw and express themselves how they need, to watch the pictures that they draw, to witness how they're able to express themselves and release whatever is going on in their little bodies, it's saddening.
Mm-hmm.
And they may not be experiencing this directly, the trauma, they're not experiencing direct trauma, but because they're part of an environment, a part of a household, a part of a home that is violent in so many ways and abusive, that is creating a spirit that is scared and doesn't know who to go to. And through CPS, now they're with me, and now we're talking about what's happening.
And how many kids, whether it is indigenous from Northern California or from other places, right? Um, one are either pushed to fully embrace their culture while living in a whole different world, right?
Mhm.
Or denied access to their cultural beliefs, values, and norms, and telling them, no, 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 just adjust to this culture and kind of forget, right? Because that's to a certain degree what the regular educational system does. It says you want to be accepted, fit in this box, right? And those pressures. But as you said, on the phone, they're on social media, they're on all these spaces, and the level of violence that they are seeing, not just in their culture, but on social media and other spaces, the fact that Native indigenous women continue to disappear in Northern California and in other parts of this country, and nobody seems to care, right?
Right, right.
And the fact that if I'm a little girl and I'm hearing that so and so disappeared and there were no consequences to whomever did it, how am I supposed to function in this society? How am I supposed to feel safe in this society? Going back to this idea of vicarious trauma, is not happening to me directly, but I can see it, right? And then not always having parents who are going to explain things at my level of development, whether I'm in kinder, whether I'm in elementary school, so on and so forth. And then how many of the men, right, in our households are drinking or using drugs and not engaging with their children to have
Mhm.
dialogues about how do you present yourself, how do you grow up as a male in this society that is not the stereotypical piece that you see in the movies, on television, and everywhere else. The pressure for these kids is immense, and we don't have enough mentors to be able to do this work. And in the same manner, we don't have enough therapists out there who understand the unique challenges of these communities, right? And so the other piece is the level of secrecy. Well, if dad beats up mom, you cannot tell anybody because CPS may show up and pick you up and it's just going to destroy your family or whatever, right? Like those type of messages that you get and how you just keep that trauma in you as a child, which is not for you to carry, but that's what's expected. You are protecting mom, you're protecting dad, supposedly, but how unhealthy that is. And then we wonder why these kids start drinking and smoking and joining gangs at the age of 10, 12, right? And the system that is not designed to care, to ask questions, but only to punish,
Correct.
right? And so it's important as a community. I've always said the
Mhm.
community is the only one that can solve the problems of the community. Um, and then what happens when our own communities are in some type of conflict, right? How do we support the next generation of children who will become leaders, hopefully, if we as adults are in conflict with each other, right? And so these kids who, for example, are now having to decide, do I go to school not knowing if when I come back, my mom and my dad will still be here? And the older kids who are in college, because I've seen this multiple times, where the mom and the dad will say, assuming they have a typical family, the mom and the dad will say, you know what? We are done here. We're leaving the country. And you, as a 20-year-old now, are going to have to take care of your 15-year-old sister and your 12-year-old brother because they want to stay here, and a sudden responsibility that you were not expecting and shouldn't be your responsibility, and how that also brings additional responsibility and trauma into your life. So it's important for us to, again, understand that there is a lot of work that needs to be done. But the first thing we need to do is recognize trauma, recognize direct trauma versus vicarious trauma, right? It's happening to somebody else, but I can see it, I can hear it, right? And it's hitting me in a different way, right? And how do we support the youth during this challenging time? So perhaps you can give us some recommendations.
Absolutely. Yeah, the youth definitely need us. And how they need us is to be able to notice, you know, notice them. I think what happens a lot in community when we see the kids, we just kind of normalize like, oh, they're just on their phones and they're just this and they're just, they don't want to engage with family. They don't want to eat with us. And I always like to counter that and say, how about embracing the youth? How about sitting with the youth? You going to sit with them, with parents. I always say, well, they'll say, well, my kid is all they want to do is be on the TV playing video games, or they don't want to come out and eat with us. And I say, well, have you ever gone to their bedroom to sit with them on their bed or on the floor and watch them play video games? And they're just, the response is like, well, why would I do that? Well, you're telling me that you want to connect with your child. At what point is it going to take you to actually meet them where they're at? If they're in their room playing a video game, go there. If they're at the soccer game, go watch their game. If they have a performance at their school, go watch the performance. Go to their classroom. Have you volunteered? Have you taken an hour or two out of the month to go volunteer? Go see your child in school. Oh, my kid doesn't want that. They're going to be embarrassed. Your kid really wants that. They just don't know how to tell you that. And so it's really being in tune with what your gut's telling you, that you want to be close to your kiddo, but are you willing to make the sacrifice to make that happen? Are you willing to go to your kids' high school and volunteer in the office? I don't care if they're in 12th grade. Go watch them while they're on their break. Go say hello to them. Take them some food. Take them some food for them and their friends. It's not difficult. It is really simple. And when you show those acts of love and care that you're nurturing, a relationship that you're wanting, that's where we see the kids. Wherever the kids are, go there. Be with them. Be curious. Ask them questions. Ask them about what they're wearing. And when they start talking with you, if you don't understand a word, ask them what that means. Mm-hmm. I'm always asking, hey, tell me what that means. I don't get it. What's the lingo? Yours is so much different than when I was a kid years ago. And making light of what they're saying, even if they're a lot of the times they don't want to talk to you, because like, what's this adult doing around here? But when you make a space where you really are showing that you're curious and you're interested in them in a good, loving way, they're gonna sense that, and they will, with time, begin to trust that and open up more. In my work with the kids, parents will come in, and I always invite the parent caregiver in for the first few sessions, depending on the kids' age. The kids, developmentally able to say, I just want to come in by myself, appropriate levels of ages, they'll come in on their own. But always the first few sessions is always with caregiver and kid. And parents will take over the space. And they'll say, well, speak for the kid. And I just sit there and I nod and I don't ask questions, and I'll turn to the kid and I'll ask, does that resonate? Is that something that you're experiencing? And they'll look at me like they have their own story. Mm-hmm. As the parents, caregiver's story is nothing like when the kiddo is alone and sharing their story with me. Because what happens is, I think as people, we forget that our development, our brain development, we as adults, 25, 30 years old and older, we have the ability to analyze and overanalyze. Whereas kids, you were talking about 0 to like 25, that are transitional age youth, their brain hasn't fully formed, and we are expecting them to have reason. Mm-hmm. And that is an unfair expectation. So if we approach our youth with care and love and curiosity, and allow them to be who they are and speak however they want to speak, say whatever they want to say and how they want to say it, let them. Because if you don't, you'll be met with resistance and they're not going to let you in. And so when I'm with a kiddo, I'll be first session with a caregiver, and the kid doesn't talk to the parent at all, wants nothing to do with him, and that's the story that the parent's coming in with. But I'll get on the floor and I'll sit with the kid and we'll color, and the kid is just talking, and sharing about their day, because I'm asking questions about them. Oh, what color do you like? Oh yeah, I like pink. I'm going to do pink on here. I like blue. I like green. And we're talking about color crayons and what's on the pictures on the coloring book. Or we're playing Uno and they are just talking. And I see parents sit there in shock that their kid is talking so much. And it just takes that one person, like one caregiver, that gets out of their own way to listen and to be curious about the kiddo, the youth in front of them. There are things that they're doing, middle school, high school, now we're in 7th through 12th grade. These kids are struggling. These 7th graders, now in high schools, juniors and seniors are looking down at these kids like they don't want them there. There's a lot of harm being created. And I'm on both sides. I have the 7th grader and I have the 10th grader, and there's different ideas of why they're in the same school, and it's devastating. But what we can do is we can remind ourselves that kids are humans, and they're little humans, they're younger people that simply want someone to show them that they matter, that they have a voice, and they want to hear it. They want to know their opinions, they want to know what they like, and that someone really cares about them. And I think with the hustle of the day, the challenges of the world and the nation, and all of the things that are happening in family dynamics, especially with our undocumented families and our Latina families, there's a lot of unrest with what's happening. But if we can come back, instead of this big zoom out of like life is hard, but zoom in and bring it in and bring your kids to the table at home. If it's not a table, whatever it is that you have at home where you can come and sit together and have a meal, even a paleta, cup of water, do that. Those are little simple things that will feed the dynamic of your family. It will create unity. It will create a way of being with each other where the kids, the youth, will want to be with us adults.
Mhm.
And that's powerful. And that's what I can offer adults when we want to see our kids.
And it's interesting how many of us, I wasn't as privileged as other people, but how many of us had the opportunity to have grandma or grandpa around
Mm-hmm.
that we could ask questions. Maybe mom and dad are having difficulties, and I'm listening to that and I'm watching that abuse, perhaps those disagreements and how they affect me. But I have grandma or grandpa that I can go talk to, right?
Right.
That's hopefully that safe person, maybe the teacher, maybe a counselor, maybe whomever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how important it is for us to be able to be present for somebody else.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of the time, as teachers, as educators as well, I'm here to do one job and leave me
Mm-hmm.
alone type of thing.
Mm.
Instead of being empathetic and saying, okay, you keep showing up 10 minutes late to class, let's talk about it. Or you have to drop off your brother or your sister at school before you can come to my class, and this is why you're late. Okay, now I understand, right? Even as adults, we keep using the same approach, I would say, on how we interact with other people. And if we experience trauma ourselves, or we were the victims of vicarious trauma, we often bring it with us wherever we go. And healing is so important because if we don't heal, we are not, we're again, Dr. Maria Hess used to say, trauma is the gift that keeps on giving. So we'll just pass it on. If you become a supervisor at work, how are you going to treat the people you supervise? And if you have children, how do you treat your own children? And what are your expectations, right? Um, and so it's essential for us to get together and have these dialogues that you mentioned, right? So, for those of you who are listening to this and you are maybe educators, how do you demonstrate, how do you create a welcoming space for your students,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you are a supervisor or an employer, how do you create welcoming and safe space for your employees? And if you are a parent, how are you creating these safe spaces, as you said, for your children to approach you and say, hey, I didn't like this,
Mm-hmm.
or this is what's happening, and this is what happened, but I was told not to talk about it. And a lot of us, as you said, to a certain degree, sometimes parents give their kids video games and cell phones and nice clothes and everything else almost so that we are buying
Mm-hmm.
the their time to say, don't come and talk to me. I'll give you everything, just don't come and talk to me, because we haven't healed from our own trauma. Therefore, we don't know how to work from a healthy perspective. But it's work that we need to do as adults in order to make ourselves more approachable, right? And
Right.
that is important because a lot of parents, again, we just continue to pass this trauma on to somebody else. And you said it clearly, this idea of if your child is not coming at you, why haven't you gone to your child, right? In
Yep.
my situation, I don't have children of my own, but it doesn't matter with the kids I've been working with for 30 years. It doesn't matter that they are in their 30s now, some of them. Um, Some of them are actually in their 40s now. And it doesn't matter when we sit at a table, let's say we go to a restaurant, they know that no cell phones are allowed. right? Because we are here to engage in dialogue. We are here to create community.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've had those kids who are, teenagers now, whose parents were my students years ago. And the kid will start pulling out the cell phone, and then the parent will say, Rafael doesn't allow that at this table. Oh, but you allow it at the house. Yeah, but here it's not happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's about creating those safe spaces where we can speak with each other. We can celebrate each other's existence because we are only together for 30 to 40 minutes
Mm-hmm.
once every whatever amount of months. And so creating these healthy spaces is one of the best things that we can do, again, as educators, as parents, as caretakers, whatever our situation is. And you do that, right? As a psychotherapist, that's your job. Now, how do you, as a psychotherapist, um, take care of your own mental health so that you don't end up becoming the victim of vicarious trauma?
Right. And avoiding compassion fatigue. Right. So I'm intentional, and I talk about this a lot when I do presentations on campus. That I'm intentional about my circle. I'm intentional about who has access to me. I'm intentional about who I spend time with. I'm intentional about, I love being with the land. Ever since I was a little girl, I love being barefoot, running in the dirt, being on the grass, playing with the trees, hugging the trees, being with the ocean. And that is something that is part of who I am. And so I connect myself with nature. I read. Um, I read just to keep my brain going. I rest. And for me, self care, whatever we want to call that, sometimes there's a taboo about that, like what's self care. If I can't take care of myself, how can I care for others? And if I'm not pouring into my own spirit and doing the things that I love and that I'm passionate about, it's humanly impossible, spiritually impossible for me to tap into other human spirits to connect. And so, yes, I love what I do. I love being with people, but the minute I'm done, I'm done. I close the door, I leave it at the door, that stays there. Um, my time is spent alone, and that's how I regroup. Some people will say, let's go to this event, or let's do this, or let's do that. For me, that's work. So if I'm going to the event, it's because I'm working. I'm going with people. I'm going to reach out to people. I'm going to care for people, ask them how they're doing. I'm very intentional in how I communicate with people. And that I know that if I'm doing something in the community, I'm not just showing up just to enjoy the event. I'm actually showing up to see people, to meet them where they're at. And that's how I connect with, colleagues in the community. And those are connections that I'm able to utilize with the students or the families that I'm working with. I collaborate. I bring people and connect them to resources and community. So my care time, my nurture time is alone with nature, and my home is my sanctuary. And I have a cat who's about almost 20 years old, Boots. We chill at home. He has, I call it supervised rec time in the yard because he's an old guy now. He can't be outside by himself anymore. And he breathes life into me. And for me, that's what works for me. I love road trips. I'll, take a drive down to LA or San Diego on a Friday, and I'll come back, Sunday night. I love doing those things because I can just drive with the wind, the music's blasting, the windows are rolled down, and that's just my freedom. My freedom to be me, to let go of the hard stories that I've heard over the last week or so. This last week, I had a wonderful cultural circle that I was a part of. um, that just really has moved a lot of spiritual medicine within me, that I feel just so ready to do what's next. And so I tap into those opportunities where I can build spiritually. So that's what I do to care for myself.
And that's super important, right? Because a lot of us, I mean, we are privileged to have our own homes, perhaps, or home
Mm-hmm.
or spaces, I would say, where we can just be one with nature or we can just be alone. And there's a very important difference here between alone and lonely,
Correct.
right? I have also used the time alone to be able to process, to let go, so on and so forth. And just like you, right? They're not visible here, but even my background is a garden, right? It's super
Mm-hmm.
important for
Yes.
us who are connected to our ancestry to be connected to nature. But in my office, I have four different plants at the moment. And at home, I always have like 6 to 8 different plants. If it's not rosemary, is this, is that, the other. Here I have rosemary and I have somebody gave me bougainvilleas for my birthday, and then I have bamboo, and I have a couple other things. Again, we're always connected to nature because it's such a healing thing. And going back to this point, because in the Latinx community, a lot of people, if you try to invest energy on your own mental health, your own emotional health, your own physical health, sometimes our own families will accuse us of being selfish, right? And I always tell people I'll take walks, 40-minute walks typically. And then sometimes somebody will call me randomly, right? And it's like, is it an emergency? No, I just said, hang on a second. If it's not an emergency, this is my 45-minute time. I'm going for my walk. Call me in 50 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
right? Oh, it's something quick. Yeah, but this is my time,
Mm-hmm.
right? If it is an emergency, we can put a stop to everything. But if it's not an emergency, it can wait, right?
Yeah.
And it brings me back to something I've been talking about in a couple of the previous episodes, and that is, it's like when you're in an airplane and a cabin pressure is affected. So the masks come down, and they always tell you, put the mask on yourself first before you put it on a child or somebody else, because otherwise you might pass out. And then you're of no good for anybody. And so that's how self-care works, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, as you said, going into nature, if you are privileged to have a garden, going to your garden. If you have animals at home, taking care of the animals. And one of the things that I do, and I respect that other people may not approve of it, but I see the animals here at the college where I work, right? We have squirrels, we have skunks, we have
Mm-hmm.
foxes, we have other animals, we have birds. And sometimes, like today, I'm here in my area by myself, and I'll go out, and if the squirrel is out there, right, talking to the squirrel,
Mm-hmm.
because it comes from our ancestral stuff,
Yes.
right? It seems weird to people whose ancestry they have disconnected from, right? But for us, saying hi to the birds, saying
Mm-hmm.
hi to the animals,
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that we are one with Mother Nature and we're going to respect it to the best of our ability,
Mm-hmm.
that is healthy. The fact that Frank the skunk goes by my office probably once a week at night, and I go out and it sees me and it just goes back to eating, and I acknowledge him and I'll just say, hey Frank, how are you? Working at it, right? Like getting his food in the middle of the night. And I'll walk 20 feet from where he is, and it's like letting him know, it's like, I'm not here to harm you. I'm not here to scare you. Hear my voice, hear the tone of my voice. I'm just
Mm-hmm.
heading to my vehicle. I hope
Mm-hmm.
you have a wonderful evening, right? And those things are just as healing as a lot of other things, because again, being with nature, it's such a beautiful thing. So for those people who can go hiking, those people who can go on a long walk, those people who can go camping, it's so beneficial to be with nature because we come from nature, right?
Absolutely.
So it's important again. Trauma exists. Trauma will continue to exist. Vicarious trauma can be experienced in childhood, but also in adulthood. Sometimes you see, if you are already working, you see that your supervisor is yelling at another colleague
Mm-hmm.
and it triggers your memories of when your dad used to yell at your mom or something similar. Again, pay attention to that. How do you take care of yourself from that? And how do you heal? Because vicarious trauma and direct trauma are things that are always going to exist.
Oh,
So I would say we are coming to the end of this conversation. Um, any final recommendations, any final statements you would like to make so that people, hopefully, who are listening to this will walk away and say, okay, I'm connecting with some of this stuff, right? The other recommendation that I always tell people is the benefit of writing in a journal. And nowadays, right, people, when before cell phones really would say, I don't want to write in a journal because somebody goes into my room and they read through it. But we want people to stay away from technology for their mental health, but sometimes you can start a journal in your phone and just write. But is there any other recommendation that you can make for our listeners?
absolutely. I think the most important part of our being is listening to our body. I think we get so busy being busy, working, and all life's challenges that we don't pause enough to listen to our heart. Is our heart racing? Are we out of breath? Are we doing a gazillion things at a time and we're speaking really fast? That everything we're doing is rapid? Or are you maybe you're not listening to your body, but what your body is doing, you're not recognizing it? So awareness, are you only sleeping 4 hours a day and you think that's normal? Oh, I drink coffee, I do this to keep myself awake because I have all these things to manage. And I like to tell, people, especially our Latina families, is we're not machines. We are humans. We are humans. And we are standing here today on the shoulders of our ancestors that worked so hard for us to be here today. And so, how can we honor our ancestors in bringing back those rituals? Um, you know, Connecting with our body, connecting, with nature. And I in the work also, what I call it is a toolkit. What are you doing to prepare yourself when you have those low moments, or those moments that you have no idea that you need something, but that there's something that you do. Is it um, that you're actually seeking professional help? At the JC, students have access to free therapy. Yes, there's only so many of us that there is now. Right now we have another person that is bilingual, bicultural, Spanish speaking on campus, which is wonderful. But take advantage of that, even if it's something that you think is hard. You don't want to tell anybody anything, or well, that's going to be so uncomfortable, or I'm being shamed by my family, like I'm not supposed to be in mental health, that's not what we do. Tap into those resources that are free to you and go once or twice. Maybe it isn't for you, but learn about it. What will that offer you? Maybe you're not ready in the moment, but know that if you can have one or two experiences with a professional to talk about something that is hard, Maybe when you are ready to do more processing of that, you will have had that one experience that when you are ready, it's there. And so I encourage you to do a lot of body work. And the body work that I'm saying is be aware of what your body is feeling. And if you have one person, make sure you have one person that you can tell them, I don't feel okay. And maybe that one person can hold you through something that's hard. It could be a teacher, it could be a friend, it could be a relative. Maybe it's not somebody that lives with you. It could be maybe the therapist. Sometimes it's just the therapist. And so being really intentional about what are you allowing in your life and not distracting you, because we have so many distractions. We have so many opportunities to be a part of something or to detach from something. But what is it that helps you feel your optimal self, like that you feel that you're seen and you're heard? What are those things? And if you don't know, like Raphael said, start writing, journaling, start reading some self-help books. I do a lot of that for my own wellness. So there's so many resources. It's really up to you. But if you can just maybe identify one or two things that help you listen to your body. Sometimes I have students put a rubber band around their wrist because they don't feel. And so I say, just snap that rubber band. And when you don't feel anything, snap it. It'll bring you back to your present moment. And like, oh, my body is actually, I can feel it. I can feel that pain of that rubber band snapping. And so knowing what the feeling is important. And we are so accustomed to numbing and not going there, not showing the emotion, not being angry, not being sad, not being happy, or being one or the other and not knowing what's in between. Mm-hmm. So that's really important. And I know emotions, being able to tap into the emotion is really difficult for a lot of people in general. And I want to normalize that feelings are normal. There are situations that will trigger anger, sadness, joy, and if anything, what is the one thing that gives you joy? What's the one thing that you can release all of those ugly toxins within your brain and your body? Is it the way you're eating that's really making you feel a certain way? Reevaluating what you're putting into your body is really important. I talk to people and some people aren't drinking water. Like, water is everything. Water is life. And so really evaluating, like, what are you consuming as far as food, natural fruits, vegetables, water? Are you doing that? I mean, our campus we've been privileged to have opportunities to be able to get that and take that home. But we need you to know that is important to your wellness. Are you eating a lot of candy, a lot of caffeine products? Are you going to the coffee shop and consuming all of these sugary drinks? Like, sugar has an impact on your wellness. Sugar really affects trauma. You're numbing that trauma through sugar, and the sugar is affecting your well-being. So I gave you a whole menu of opportunities, and I hope that something lands for you. And I hope that you can take one thing away and maybe kind of focus on that. And then as you are able to do that one thing, you start adding another thing to your wellness.
Thank you for all that information. We are hoping that this podcast is going everywhere, but for people in Sonoma County, we also want to remind you that Humanidad Therapy and Education Services is there to support you. You can check in with them and then find out when the next convivencia, which is like a group therapy, is going to take place. Ask about those services, ask about individual therapy. And again, there are many community organizations that can support, but again, take care of yourselves, because otherwise you cannot take care of other people long term if you're not taking care of yourself. Like Brijida said, if you are drinking too much coffee, if you're drinking sugary drinks, It's not just about the moment, but the future. How do those sugary drinks affect your chances of getting diabetes? How does those sugary drinks affect the chances that you may get Alzheimer's and all of those issues? So educate yourself, and we'll have Brijida come back in the near future for another interview. But for now, we want to thank you for taking the time and being here at Chisme is Live. And I look forward to our next conversation. Take care.
Gracias.